Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family, talk about foster, adoptive, and kinship care. I'm Dawn Davenport. I am both the host of this show as well as the director of the nonprofit creatingafamily.org. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is so important. We hear it so often, and that is block care. We're going to be talking about understanding and, most importantly, overcoming blocked care. We will be talking today with an adoptee and adoptive mom, Melissa Corkum. She provides insight and resources to adoptees, adoptive parents, and professionals through her speaking, coaching, and writing. She is a TED speaker, a safe and sound protocol practitioner, a cultivating connections facilitator, and a certified Enneagram coach, as well as the co-founder of Adoption Wise. Additionally, and not incidentally, she is the co-author of Claim Compassion, the Adoptive Parent's Guide to Overcoming Blocked Care with Neuroscience and Faith. And they also have an 8-session program on block care called Foundations for Overcoming and Preventing Blocked Care. Welcome, Melissa, to Creating a Family.
Dawn, thanks so much for having me.
We're going to talk in a minute about how we define block care, but we get questions so often, both sent in to us as well as we have a large online support group. And so this is such an important question and such an important issue, and one that I am so thankful to see that we're getting a lot more discussion surrounding it too. I wanted to read you an email that we have received. Dear Dawn, it says, I am the mother of 9 children born to me, ages 20 months to 18 years. All homeschooled, and I have adopted my husband's cousin as of 2 months ago. We did not know her prior to this, and the adoption moved very quickly once the state determined that the mother could not get her act together. She is 3.5 years old. I think she would have an easier time overcoming her attachment issues if I could overcome mine. Everywhere I read, no one has a problem with loving and sympathizing with their adopted child, but I do. I feel like a complete beast. I am civil to her, often affectionate, and I try to be fair about her rights in the family, but I am unable to fake expressions of love and do not like how the integration has to be so sudden and total. I feel like if I was joining a family, I would be quiet and shy and try not to make waves and let people get used to me. Instead, I have to treat her like the sister to my children from the minute number one, and everyone has to act like she has always been here. I don't want to bore you with the details, especially of how awful I am. She is a normal little girl, but I am choking on what is required of me. I listened to about 24 of your podcasts preparing for the adoption, especially anything about attachment and parenting. But now that I'm living it, it's a lot harder than I imagined. Melissa, is this a good example of blocked care?
Yeah, absolutely. We get similar emails, social media messages on our support groups with similar sentiments. And it makes me want to run out and find this mom and give her a hug because it's so hard.
I know. That's exactly how I feel. I want to hug her. I want to reassure her. Yes, I'm so glad you said that. So how do you define blocked care?
Yeah, so blocked care is something that happens in a parent's nervous system when the nervous system is overwhelmed with extreme stress. And it's a self-protective mechanism that happens subconsciously. And I think that's the piece that we try to overemphasize when we're talking to parents, because when they can't find this love and connection and attachment to their child, like this mother wrote, she feels like a beast. And there's definitely something that she can do about it, but it's not her fault per se. Her nervous system is protecting her from a big change. The nervous system doesn't love change. And sometimes that comes out by turning on this protective mechanism that makes it really hard to give affectionate care to a child that you're caring for, and like she said, she's doing the things, she's going through the motions, but the emotional connection isn't there. And that's exactly what we see in parents with block care, is that they're going through the motions. These are parents who mean the best. They're good parents, but they don't know what is happening and they don't know how to stop it.
In the book, Reclaim Compassion, you make a distinction between blocked care and blocked trust. What is that distinction?
So a really simplistic distinction is that blocked trust is what children experience. So not all children, but if you're a child who your nervous system is expecting a certain type of care, the kind of care that we talk about in that attachment cycle, and for whatever reason, it doesn't get it, then the child's nervous system turns on its own self-protective mechanism and is like, oh, well, I thought I was supposed to be able to trust adults to care for me, and they haven't really come through. And adults might not be safe people anymore. And so it's kind of like this wall in your heart, right, that keeps a child from opening up, being vulnerable, having that safe, intimate connection with a caregiver. And so it's a similar mechanism in the parent, but in this case, it's blocked care because that wall keeps them from caring for their child, whereas the child's wall keeps them from trusting the adult.
So maybe this would be a good time then to talk about the healthy attachment cycle that happens when neither blocked care or blocked trust are there. So can you describe what that attachment cycle is?
Yeah, and I'll disclaim this by saying I'm by no means an attachment expert. So this will be like a kindergarten's take on attachment.
That's totally fine.
But when a child has a need, somehow they express that need. And it starts the day an infant's born, and it usually starts with crying. And then an adult is supposed to come in and figure out what that need is. Does the baby need to eat? Does the baby need to sleep? Does the baby need a clean diaper? And they meet that need. And so that needs to happen hundreds of thousands of times in the early beginning of a child's existence to help form their understanding of the world, even their own self. Am I important? Do people hear me? Do I have a voice? All of those things. And so that's the cycle that we're talking about, the attachment cycle. A child has a need, and an adult or a caregiver meets that need. And that cycle completing itself again and again and again is what creates what we call felt safety in the nervous system.
And it also has the added benefit for the caregiver. When you are able to meet an infant's needs or a child's need, that is reinforcing that you are capable, that you are meeting this child's needs. And so it's a mutually beneficial thing that, as you said, it's a cycle and it's mutually beneficial. And it just feeds in an ideal world, it's feeding upon itself. So the issues associated with the child can interfere, and issues associated with the parent can interfere with the attachment cycle. Is that a good understanding of how this might work?
Absolutely. And I would say it definitely can happen from either part of the relationship. And once that cycle breaks, there's a new cycle that goes into effect, and it's that blocked care cycle, right? So whether it starts with the parent or the child, there's a wall there that keeps the attachment cycle from completing. And so, like, for example, if a child has blocked trust, then they potentially might reject a parent's care. And then, like you said, the parent doesn't get that dopamine and oxytocin.
Right.
And the nervous system's like, well, that didn't really feel good. Let's stop doing that. Right. And then the parent starts to withdraw and protect themselves. And then that creates a message to the child that's like, see, I told you so. These adults aren't trustworthy. Look at that adult withdrawing from me. Or the opposite might be true. A child may not have blocked trust. They're looking for that adult to care for them. And for whatever reason, that adult isn't able to. And then they're like, oh, well, you can't care for me. Maybe I shouldn't trust you. And again, it creates a cycle.
A self-fulfilling prophecy at that point.
Yeah.
Do you see that this primarily happens or only happens when parenting children with more extreme behavioral issues?
So that's a great question. And I would say it's probably one of the myths and misnomers in that blocked care, blocked trust cycle. And I think because it isn't unusual for a child with blocked trust to have big, baffling behaviors. And it's natural for parents to start to withdraw from children that have such big behaviors. It's hard to parent that. And parenting extreme behaviors creates a lot of stress in the family system. So that's definitely one reason, but it's certainly not the only reason. If we go back to the definition of blocked care, it's triggered by extreme stress. And so that extreme stress could be a job loss, a divorce, a sickness, a global pandemic, right? There are so many other things that are independent of how a child's behaving that can start to shut down those empathy and caregiving systems in the parent.
Including just having very unrealistic expectations of what the initial months are going to be or years are going to be when you are adopting, and setting yourself up with your expectations being in one place and reality being in another makes you more vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, we actually talk about that gap. And one of the things I think we haven't always been taught as parents or recognized even as a culture is whenever there is a gap between your expectations and your reality, and this happens all the time in big and small ways, there's something that needs to be grieved. And sometimes it's something small. It's a small disappointment. Like, I was really hoping for there to be sunshine today and it's raining. And sometimes it's really big things, like I thought I would be able to enjoy empty nests in my mid-50s, but it turns out I'm parenting a child who has lifelong needs.
Mm-hmm. Or even in between things, like I had in my head that this was going to be, an all boy. He's going to love sports just like I did or my husband did. He's going to be the kid that just like I used to be or that I will enjoy. And he turns out not to be that way. He turns out to be uncoordinated and quiet and just totally the opposite of what you were hoping for. And that can be somewhere in between. That is also something to grieve.
Yeah, and unresolved grief is really hard. It's taking up space in our nervous systems.
Let me take a moment to tell you about a new, or I guess new-ish, podcast from Creating a Family. That podcast drops on Sunday. It is weekly, and it's short form, no more than 5-10 minutes max, where we answer a question from our audience. So you can send in questions via email to info@creatingafamily.org. And please listen to Weekend Wisdom. It's a terrific resource, so check it out. Oh, and let your friends know about it too. Okay, what causes a well-meaning parent to not be able to attach and bond with their adopted child? You mentioned stress. Is stress the primary? Is it the only thing? Or is there a constellation of factors that we can look at and say these parents are going to be more likely to enter the blocked care cycle?
I don't think it's one thing for sure. I think it's definitely a constellation of things. I probably couldn't give a complete list, but I think some of the things you mentioned and some of the things that we already talked about, a gap between expectations and reality. And, we're expecting to bond and attach to one type of child, and they're not who we expected them to be. We might not understand their personality. We might not understand their behaviors. I also know that parents come into parenting. There's no manual. There's even in adoption, there's training and a home study and all of these things. But ultimately, they fall really short of actually preparing parents to do the hard work of parenting. And so we see a ton of parents who have a lot of their own unresolved big and little t traumas from their own childhood, perhaps their own attachment issues that they bring into parenting. And that for sure can interrupt that attachment cycle. So I think stress, I think our own attachment challenges that we bring in as parents, I think unresolved grief, coming from that big gap between expectations and reality, those are all parts of it.
This is totally anecdotal, but it does seem to me that we hear of this more often with kinship caregivers, and especially non-grandparent, aunts, uncles, cousins. It's also possible that one of the reasons we hear it is that they feel more comfortable talking about it. And it's also possible just because of the nature, they were not actively seeking out to bring this child in. I wonder if you have seen that as well.
We probably don't have as much anecdotal evidence. We definitely work with a lot of kinship parents. I actually have never really thought about it too much, but it does make sense for the reason that you mentioned. One is there's not the same kind of shame of I wanted this desperately and now exactly. I don't feel those, warm, caring feelings.
I am a failure because I asked for this and now I'm not appreciating it. That type of thing. Yes.
Right. Where a kinship, a lot of times kinship carers kind of fall into it. There's always a decision that they made, obviously, but it was kind of, presented upon them.
Well, and many of them will say that they really didn't have a choice. Now we try to make them stop and help think through that they actually do have a choice. But a lot of times they think, well, what choice is this? The kid's going to go to foster care. If I don't step up, everybody's expecting me to step up. So go ahead.
I think all of that. And I think, there's complexities in kinship when you already have a relationship potentially with birth parents, and that relationship is family, right? And so I think that's extra stress on the nervous system when you're trying to integrate a new child into the system. And you're also, on the other hand, trying to manage your family dynamics around the circumstances for why you were asked to take in a family member.
And it happens often very quickly. Number one, there's often no training, no preparation, no helping you set realistic expectations. You have probably not done reading or research on your own because you weren't expecting to do this. And the whole idea of trauma or whatever is just not something that's entered into your sphere of things to think about. And the decision often has to be made quickly. And as I mentioned, very often we hear, I didn't have a choice. It's interesting to me because I don't hear it. And again, this is all anecdotal, but I don't hear it from grandparents. And that just could be for whatever reason. Anyway, I just threw it out there. I just thought it was interesting. Let's talk about some of the common emotions for parents who are experiencing this. The emailer, I'm awful. I feel like a beast. I'm a terrible person. I mean, that's something she experienced. What are some other common emotions that you hear from parents who are not feeling connected to this child that they have brought into their home?
Well, I think number one, we kind of already touched on it, is shame.
Big one.
People have barely thought these thoughts. They definitely don't want to speak them. And when they do, it comes with that shame of, I must be a terrible person. This is my experience.
Yeah.
And I would say guilt, which, is attached to shame, sadness, anger, resentment, lots and lots of big feelings.
Yeah, a lot of big feelings, and none of them feel good.
Yeah, they're not the feel-good ones, for sure.
They're not the feel-good ones, for sure. And another thing that we see not infrequently is that it's one parent. It's not both parents. And that also adds complexity because you feel even more alone in that situation. Do you see that as well?
I would say we see both. We see where one parent is really struggling and another one really kind of is like digging their heels in and saying like, we can do this. I think it's more common for us to see it kind of like taking turns. That's kind of how it worked with my husband and me. Like one week I was like, okay, I would like pull myself up by my bootstraps and, get some extra resolve and be like, we're going to do this.
We've started this. We're going to finish this. By golly, we're
really determined. And my husband would be ready to throw in the towel. And then the next week it could be the exact opposite.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we also see it where a family's really in crisis and both parents are just really, really struggling.
Yeah. When one parent is not feeling it, that adds its own complexity. But when both parents have just at the end of their rope, yeah, that's when it's really hard, I think. Guys, I don't know about you, but I am loving this interview and I hate to interrupt it, but I want you to know about some free courses that we offer at creatingafamily.org. They are 1-hour courses that you can take. They're really aimed more at people who are actively parenting. They're brought to you by our partners, the Jockey Being Family Foundation. You can check out the full library at bit.ly/JBF support. That's bit.ly/JBF support. All right, now we need to come about what can we do about this feeling of not liking or loving our child. And I think we need to give specific examples. And let me just say that we can't touch on all of them, but the book Reclaim Compassion, The Adoptive Parent's Guide to Overcoming Block Care with Neuroscience and Faith will go into a lot more detail, but we're going to go into some here. So you list a host of things. And what I particularly appreciated in the book was that it felt very practical because at this point, that's what people need. They need it to be practical. They don't need theory at this point, although you do include theory as well. One of the first things you said is be kind to your body. First of all, why did you start there? And then tell us about what you meant by that.
So the big overarching answer to how to prevent and overcome block care really comes down to really good nervous system care for the parent. And the theory behind that is in order to be in the kind of reciprocal relationship where that attachment cycle is working, both parent and child need a sense of in neuroscience what's called felt safety. Our good friend Robin Goebel talks about it as connection mode as opposed to protection mode, right? And so in order to feel open and vulnerable enough to be in that kind of reciprocal relationship, our nervous system has to be getting enough signs and cues that it's safe. And when we're in these high stress situations, our nervous system is getting a lot of cues that we may not be safe. Even if technically we are, there's these things that are saying, that's a stressor. What about that? And so it's really easy for our neuroception, our subconscious part in our nervous system to be like, oh, we're too stressed, shut down, or shut that system down, or attack, or whatever. So we talk to parents about doing practical things that help them care for their nervous system. And imagine that like helping us grow roots into our sense of felt safety, that we can anchor ourselves really strongly in our sense of felt safety so that we can stay available to be in relationship with our kids, even when it's stressful. And this is not to turn off our protective mechanism when it's necessary. You know, if you have a child in your house that's aggressive, like you want that system to tell you that you could possibly be in danger. But we find that sometimes parents' nervous systems become overreactive. You know, a child comes into the house after school and slams the door, and maybe just by accident, and immediately the parent's nervous system is thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to have a major blow up, right? Because maybe that's what the history has shown us, right? But we need to anchor ourselves into a sense of felt safety long enough to be able to evaluate, was that slam door really dangerous, a sign of danger, or was it just the wind blew the wrong way, you know, at that time? So the practical part of that looks like we need to send cues to our body, our mind, from our external environment and in our relationship. So the nervous system is looking at 3 different domains, internal, external, and between, for cues. And we can actively feed it cues of safety. And so we start with the body. Is your body feeding your neuroception cues of felt safety? And this sounds silly, but like if we're tired, that's a cue of stress to our nervous system, not a cue of safety. We can't control our kids' behaviors, but we can control some of these other things. Are we feeding our body well? Are we caring for ourselves well if we're sick? Are we hydrated enough? All those things. And they seem silly and kind of oversimplified.
But they're important.
Yeah. If you stack all of those and you're tired and sick and dehydrated and hungry, your body's going to feel stressed, and it's already feeling the stress of some of those things that you can't control. So let's do the best we can to feed our body cues of safety in as many ways as possible.
Okay, you mentioned the physical ways to feed your body cues, but there were other components of taking care of ourselves as another way. What were some of those?
I would say the one that has been the most impactful, it's the one that we start everyone off on, is something called points of joy. You know, when we're in these stressful situations, whether it's a stressful life situation or a stressful parenting situation, joy is kind of like the first thing to go. It kind of feels, you know, like a little indulgent, right? And our nervous system has a mechanism of a confirmation bias, right? Once we go down a path, the nervous system's looking to keep confirming that we're on the same path. We talk about things like self-fulfilling prophecies. So if we're in a stressful situation and we're, oh my gosh, life is so stressful, that's where like our mindset is. Our nervous system's going to be looking extra hard for stressors, right? Which we don't really need. And that doesn't really help us. On the flip side, if we make a list of things that bring us joy and we set out intentionally to do those things and not even just do them, but notice them. A lot of times parents do this exercise and they're like, oh my gosh, I had points of joy all over my day and I just hadn't even stopped to realize that I do them. Then you're telling your brain there is joy in life, even though it's hard. Keep looking for the joy. And then instead of looking for the extra stressors, we're noticing the joy. And again, I know this seems silly and simplified, but we hear from our people all the time, like, you know, points of joy help me feel like I got my locus of control back. I can feel a shift in my nervous system, even though nothing else has really changed. The world feels a little bit brighter, you know, all of those things. And they don't have to be huge things. They can be taking the first sip of your coffee while it's still hot, you know.
Right. I was thinking that exact one. Yes.
Right. It can be where I live. It's kind of snowy right now, right? And so there's still kind of that like fresh snow on the patio and in the trees. And I can take 5 seconds, even if you have a kid throwing a massive tantrum, you can find a window to look out and notice the beauty outside and take 2 deep breaths and find that little itty bitty slice of joy.
I love that. Another actionable step for how to overcome block joy, it's somewhat related to what you were talking about, but you have it separate in the book, and that is establish a healthy mindset. What do you mean by that?
So points of joy is kind of like one of the tiny steps you can take to establishing a healthy mindset. There are so many other things that draw our minds to different things. So it could be gratitude. Some of the things that we talk about in the book, you may have never thought of before, but a lot of the things in the book are just connecting the dots to how a practice that maybe you've already known about, something like gratitude, can impact something like your blocked care. Another one that we talk about is not just reclaiming compassion for ourselves, but reclaiming compassion for our kids. Most parents came into parenting and had at least a short period of time where they saw the preciousness and they had compassion for the child that they're raising. Even if they came in through kinship and it wasn't expected, there was something that compelled them to say, I can make a difference in this child's life, or I want to help them overcome the circumstances that were a part of their childhood before they came to me, all different types of things, or just like that mother's heart of looking at a picture of a child and just feeling that sense of compassion, love, all those warm feelings. A lot of us had those at some point before life got really, really hard. And so we ask parents to anchor back to that. And one of the ways we ask them to do that is find the earliest picture that you have of your child, especially if it's one that helps you go back to a time that you felt that compassion, and put that as your phone wallpaper, print it out and put it somewhere, just to remind you that there is a precious child beneath all of this stress, wherever the stress is coming from. It's especially important if the child has big behaviors. And I think as an adoptee who remembers being a child with big behaviors, that helps me tap into the importance of my own work as a parent and my responsibility as kind of the adult in the situation to do my own work. Even if my child's behaviors don't change, that's still on me to be as compassionate as I can.
Yeah. Sometimes going in at night and watching your child sleep, there is something innocent and wonderful about a child sleeping. And that can sometimes help kick it in because the child's not behaving at that point. You're just looking at the perfection that is this child.
Yeah. I also think we don't talk about this as much in the book because it could be its own separate book, but understanding why children behave the way that they do, regardless of how they came into your family, regardless of whether their behaviors are by cultural standards bigger than normal, we can always help families find a reason behind the behavior and understand the behavior in a way that helps them increase the compassion that they use to view the behavior, which then in turn increases their ability and capacity to have compassion for the child.
The behavior is a symptom, and trying to understand what is causing that symptom. Although honestly, sometimes when you're in the midst of really struggling to attach to this child, it's hard to get yourself there. That goes back to the cyclical nature of it. Because you can't see the underlying cause, you see just the behavior, which is annoying and frightening or whatever. And then that just feeds the whole thing. So you're exactly right.
Yeah. And it's actually a sign. We name 10 signs of blocked care in the book. And I think that's the first one. Like, you're so caught up in the stress of whatever parenting requires of you right now that you lose sight of and lose your curiosity for the meaning behind the behavior. So even if you're, just feeling that block of like, I don't even care why they're behaving that way, is in itself a sign that your nervous system may be struggling with blocked care.
Exactly. Well, that was a perfect segue because I was going to ask you to talk about the 10 signs. You don't have to go through all 10, but hit some of the high points of the signs. And the first one being that it's not that we don't notice, we also probably don't care what's causing this child's behavior. I don't care. I just want this child to stop.
Yeah. Some of the other signs are isolation. We tend to isolate ourselves when we're in blocked care for a myriad of different reasons. I think another one that we talk about a lot when we train professionals is parents appear or are resistant to well-meaning advice. We talk to professionals all the time and explain this to them, and they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. I just thought this parent didn't want to be helped or thought I was dumb or whatever, because you have sometimes you have coaches and therapists and social workers, saying, have you heard about trauma-informed parenting and all of these things? And that parents kind of like, I don't care. And then the professional starts thinking, oh, what is wrong with this parent? And there's nothing, there is something wrong, but it's not with the parent, right? That's a symptom of their own nervous system's shutdown. We actually have an assessment we can make available to your folks, Dawn, on our website. We'll do a link specifically for your people, adoptionwise.org/creating a family. And that assessment is basically the 10 signs, how many are you experiencing, intensity and frequency, and then it'll kind of give them practical steps based on how they answer. So, if you're driving, you're like, I can't write all these signs down and we didn't touch all of them, but you're curious, like, oh, I wonder if I am experiencing block care or how much I'm experiencing block care, then folks can head over there and we'll make that assessment free.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. That would be great. It occurs to me that there's a similarity from the professionals just assuming, not looking beyond to see what is causing this parent to seem as if they are not caring, are not wanting to learn, are not wanting to implement even some of the simpler suggestions. It's easy to think that parent is a parent who is not trying or is just a bad parent. So there's a similarity between what we can do with our children when we see our children misbehaving. If we're not looking beyond to understand what the behavior is meaning, what it is a symptom of, professionals need to do the same when they're working with parents. What is that parent's behavior a symptom of? And in this case, it could well be the symptom of blocked care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me pause here for a moment to ask you, have you subscribed to our free monthly e-newsletter? If not, you really need to. It's a once a month free way to get practical resources to help you be the best parent possible. And when you do subscribe, you get a free guide. You can subscribe by going to bit.ly/transracial guide and subscribe there. That's bit.ly/transracial guide. All right, so we are talking about what you can do if you find yourself in the position. Let's say you take the assessment of the signs for block care and you go, okay, I think I've got some block care going on here. I'm not nuts. This is actually a thing. So we've talked about some of the things you can do. Be kind to your body. Work on your mindset. Work on trying to establish a healthy mindset. Another one you have, which I love the phrase, is surround yourself with life-giving people. I love the phrase life-giving people. So I know what I think it means. What do you think that means when you say surround yourself with life-giving people?
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, nervous systems are taking in cues from our bodies, our minds, our external world, and the people whose nervous systems we're around. And if you're parenting in a really stressful situation, or if your child has big behaviors, those cues that are flooding your nervous system are not ones that are telling your nervous system, hey, we're okay, it's all good. And we are built to need interaction, safe, life-giving interaction with other people. And we mentioned isolation is a big part of blocked care. And sometimes we're isolated with people who may be reflecting back to us, you're a terrible mom. I don't like you.
If you would only do this,
yeah,
you need to, yank a knot at them, or you've got to, or you're right, you did make a mistake, or I told you you shouldn't have done this. You already had enough on your plate. Why did you add this to it? Blah, blah, blah.
Right. And that's exhausting. Like we cannot be our best selves. We cannot overcome block care when those are the messages and the kind of cues we're receiving from other people in our sphere of influence. And so we just encourage people to add interactions that are life-giving that have to do with other people. So maybe it's a great support group. It could be virtual. In person, obviously, is ideal, but we have a lot of tools. Technology has given us a lot of access to people in other ways. Marco Polo is a video messaging app that I'm a really big fan of.
Why Marco Polo? Why do you like that above other messaging apps?
I like it because it's video and our nervous system can receive more cues of safety when we can see people's eyes and their facial expressions, their tone of voice. So it gives the most access to all the safety another person can provide, co-regulation from another person, definitely more than text, obviously, and then even more than just voice.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really a huge fan of virtual video interactions if you can't get in real life with someone. And then, everyone needs a mental health provider that they trust, a therapist, a counselor, if you're a person of faith, like a spiritual director, and not because something's wrong with you, but because life is just stressful and we all need a third party, someone
Mm-hmm.
who can just absorb some of that stress that we can unload on,
Mm-hmm.
who has a little bit of a different perspective and who can help, if necessary, process some of the why we're resentful towards that child or why we know on some sense, like that initial email you read, she said she's just a normal kid, right? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's not the behavior of the kid.
Mm-hmm.
We need someone to help us, like, why is this kid so triggering to me when I can tell on a purely logical level that there's not any quote unquote good reason
Mm-hmm.
to have this reaction?
My reaction is bigger than the reality. My reaction is outsized. Exactly. The last one that I wanted to talk about, and it feels like in some ways this is a really important one, not that they all aren't, but of the ways of overcoming block care is connecting with your child. What do you mean by that?
So that's like the end of all the things, right? Like ultimately, blocked care is this break, and blocked trust is this break in this attachment relationship. And ultimately, what we want to be able to do is get back into a relationship with our child that feels good, feels better than it feels right now. And so I think in the past, before I understood block care, when there was a break in that relationship, I would encourage parents, just get back in there, try harder, try again. And it would go right back to what looked like the source of the problem, which is the relationship between the parent and the child. And so what we've realized is overcoming block care has to start really not in the relationship with the child, especially because that's where the biggest point of stress has become in that cycle. And so all the things we've talked about so far are mostly independent of your actual relationship with the child, right? You can drink more water, get enough sleep, go have coffee with your friends. None of that's like asking you to get back into that hard relationship. But at some point, that's ultimately what we're hoping for. So that happens after you've built more margin in your nervous system by doing these other things. Then we have some suggestions in the book of how to dip your toe back into that, how to start to reclaim that compassion and that relationship with your child. One really simple thing is to give an unexpected yes. And again, these are like we get some of the best stories when people tell us how this went. It doesn't have to be extravagant. Sometimes people will say, my kid asked to go to McDonald's on the way home from speech the other day, and I always say no, and they always ask. And today I just decided to say yes. And you should have seen the look on their face, And so again, it's not the slippery slope. We're not asking you to spoil your kid, but like just pick one time when you have a little bit more margin in your system and you can give that little unexpected yes, and just notice what happens. Notice how your child reacts. Notice how it feels in your own nervous system. So those are just some of those little things.
One of the things that I think you said it a while back, one of the first things that goes when we're in the midst of a situation with block care is joy. And one of the first thing that goes in connection with our kids is any sense of fun, any sense of joy.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the furthest thing for your mind. So introducing, if there is something that you enjoy doing and the child enjoys doing, and there always is, because you as a parent have to be the more flexible one. It could be that it is watching a movie from your childhood, watching movies, or there could be a TV show. It could be something, or video game, or it could be hiking, or it could be throwing a ball, or whatever. Find something that you enjoy and that you really enjoy. You're not just faking and saying, oh, yeah, let's play Candyland again, that you actually do enjoy doing, or at least don't dread, and that the child enjoys, and add that back in.
Yeah. I mean, some of the ones that we talk about in the book are little things. Like it might feel terrible in your nervous system to think about having to sit and watch a whole movie with your child. But could you watch, right? Like, but could you pull up the world's largest hippo fart on YouTube and watch that? Like that makes pretty much everyone chuckle at least, or smile or laugh. A lot of us have Alexas sitting around in our house. She tells great jokes and she makes funny fart noises, and those things are like right at our fingertips, and they take just a couple of seconds. So you can like get in, have a laugh, and get out. And you just, as you build those small positive moments with your children, you start to retrain that confirmation bias that everything with this child is hard.
Yes.
Where now we can start thinking, I can find joy with my child. Sometimes their behaviors are really big and scary. But in the midst of that, if you're trying to find even simple moments of laughter, we had one family, I thought it was brilliant. They made a secret family handshake, and they would do it every time a timer went off, just to add, that little bit of joy. It could be a little treat of food or something, but start small if you're feeling really, really blocked.
Yeah, that's excellent advice, because sometimes we think, I love your point, is that a whole movie, you think, oh, great, I have to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours sitting here. But if we start small, and it tends to build on itself. Melissa, are there times that it's simply gone too far, that it has been left unaddressed and it's gone too far? And what do we do then?
There are certainly times where it feels that way, but we really, truly believe that every parent can overcome their blocked care. But sometimes we need a break. We need respite. That's another one of those first things we invite parents to get into place is you need a break. If things are really, really intense, there might need to be a higher level of care for your child. You might need to bring in some reinforcements. You might need some in-home treatment or care. So it looks a little bit different when it's really, really intense. Points of joy is like putting drops in a bucket, right? A bucket that's probably a little leaky, to be perfectly honest, right? So it helps and it definitely moves the needle. And our people tell us that. But if your bucket is really, really big and has really, really big holes, then points of joy is going to help, but it's not going to move the needle the way that we need it to move. And so I'm a huge fan of body work. We could do a whole podcast on that. We talk a lot about it on our podcast at Adoption Wise. We work with parents to do some of that. I'm a safe and sound protocol practitioner, so we do that with parents. And those are the things that are like cupfuls of water into the bucket when just a little bit of cognitive coaching isn't going to move the needle, where you really have to dig into the nervous system and give it a little help from spinning its wheels.
I totally get that. And I get the analogy of a bucket too. There are times when our buckets have a lot of holes. And no shame there, no guilt. It is what it is. And you don't have to beat yourself up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa Corkum, for talking with us today about block care. I truly appreciate it. The book is Reclaim Compassion, The Adoptive Parent's Guide to Overcoming Blocked Care with Neuroscience and Faith. It is excellent. I cannot recommend it enough. So thank you for being with us today. And for those who are feeling this, you are not alone, and there is help and there is hope. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Before you go, let me say a shout out of thanks to Vista Del Mar. They are a licensed nonprofit adoption agency with over 65 years of experience helping to create families. They offer home study only services as well as a full service infant adoption program, an international home study adoption program, and a foster to adopt program. You can find them online at vistadelmar.org/adoption.